Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello dear learners, I am Dr. Supriya Jain, working as an assistant professor in the Institute of Business Management at GLA University, Mathura. So, let us start with our today's session, and before we move for our today's session, let us look at the topic we have covered in our previous session. In our previous session, we have studied about the cost. As we all know, cost is a sacrifice for whatever the production we are making, and in today's time it is very important for all of us to analyze the cost, because cost is the only component which is available to the firm where they could have a scope of increasing their profit margin because of this cutthroat competition in the market, right. It is very difficult for the producer to increase the prices of the commodity to increase the revenue, right. So, they need to understand the areas where they can focus on reducing their cost. So, for that reason we have talked about cost analysis, and there also we have discussed about different types of cost, like we have talked about explicit and implicit cost, we have discussed about controllable and non-controllable cost, we have talked about direct and indirect cost, we have talked about incremental and sunk cost. So, there are different type of costs which are involved in the business, and there are few costs which need to taken into account what impact are they going to create. Like one of the important costs we have talked about opportunity cost, which is also called as imputed cost, and this is again the another name can be implicit cost, right. Now, this is the cost which we are not paying to anybody and nor we are mentioning it into the books of accounts. So, sometimes we do not take it into consideration, but it is again very important, because in economics we are not only concerned with the accounting profit, we need to understand whether we are in economic gain or economic loss. Thereafter, we have discussed about this total cost, total variable cost and total fixed cost, and for the understanding of short run and long run cost and output relationship, these costs were different. These costs are very important to know, right. Like total cost is basically the summation of total variable cost plus total fixed cost, and total fixed cost is the cost which remain fixed, which does not changes with the change in the output, right. Whereas, variable costs are those costs which varies with the variation in the output, and that is why we call them as a variable cost. But if you look at the nature of this fixed cost, this remain fixed, whereas variable cost is varying, but the rate of variation is different with the output, right. Initially the variable cost increases with the higher margin and with the slower rate, whereas at later it increases with the higher rate, right. Thereafter, we have talked about the average concept of these costs, like what will be the cost per unit if we are calculating the average fixed cost, average variable cost, and again average cost. And for the study of the cost, we need to find out where our cost of production is minimum. We always take into account average cost. This is the cost of production per unit. Okay. Then we have talked about this marginal cost. Marginal cost is the cost of producing one additional unit, right. If we are adding an additional unit of commodity, so what extra cost are we going to incur on the same, that we study under this marginal cost. And thereafter, we have talked about cost and output relationship in short run as well as in long run, right. So, let us look at the learning objective of today's session, what all you will be able to understand by our today's discussion. Here in this session, I am going to introduce you with the concept of economies and diseconomies of scale. Now, this is the term which you must have heard various times. We have come across this economies and diseconomies of scale, and because of that there are different type of costs which involves in our business, and how we will be able to get the advantages, okay, if you are working on the large scale or if you are working on the small scale. So, that is what we are going to cover here, is what is meant by economies and diseconomies of scale. Thereafter, this session will help you to develop an understanding of economies of scope as well, right. How we are differentiating between economies of scale and what is meant by economies of scope. And lastly, you will be able to analyze the cost and learning curve. So, these will be the learning session for you for our today's class. And now before we move ahead and I will explain you about economies and diseconomies of scale, I here want you to recall back what we have discussed in our previous lecture, so as you will be able to understand what we are talking here about economies and diseconomies of scale. So, students, you must be able to understand this relationship very carefully, where we have understood the relationship between the marginal cost and average cost. So, this is how I have drawn the marginal cost curve. This is your x axis and this is our y axis, and as we all know, here on the x axis we represent the quantity and the output, you can say, and on the y axis we always represent the cost. So, the average cost curve looks like this. This is how we basically draw this average cost curve, and this relationship also we have discussed in our previous class, where we have seen how average fixed cost and average variable cost affects the average cost curve and why this curve is of U shape. So, we have seen that initially when we increase the output, our cost reduces, and then thereafter it started increases after a point of time, and this is how our marginal cost curve cuts our average curve from below, right. And here we have seen the point when marginal cost curve is lesser than the average cost curve, our average cost will decline, there will be a reduction in the average cost, and when marginal cost is greater than the average cost, in that case average cost will increase, whereas the point where marginal cost is equals to the average cost, this point is called as optimum point. Like up to this point, if you are making a production, then our cost of production will be minimum, right. So, for you it is important to understand that the average cost curve, as because we are talking about the short run, so we denote the short run average cost curve with SAC, and when we talk about long run average cost curve, and since long run average cost curve comprises of various short run average cost curve, like see, this is SAC 1 and this is SAC 2 and maybe this is SAC 3, right. So, by combining all these three cost curve, we get the long run average cost curve LAC, and this is why we call it as a envelope curve, because long run is a planning horizon and we can change our fixed factor, like these are the size, plant size, which we can increase in the long run. So, long run comprises of various short run average cost curve. Now, for your understanding, what we are going to cover here is why this LAC curve is of U shape, why this is of U shape, that is the answer which we are going to understand in this lecture, where we are going to discuss the economies and diseconomies of scale. And this U curve represent that when initially you increase the size of your output, okay, output when you increase, then the cost will decrease initially, but up to a point it will reduce, and further if you will increase the size of your production, these cost will increase. So, let us start with our discussion. We are going to talk about economies and diseconomies of scale. So, economies of scale basically means lowering of cost of production by producing in the bulk, right. Economies of scale means the advantages, you can call economies as an advantages, and scale here means the scale on which we are working, right, the size of operations we are into, right. So, we are talking here about the long run scale, if we are working at the larger scale, right, when we are producing in the bulk, and by producing in bulk or how we are able to reduce our cost, that means the economies of scale, right. By producing in a larger quantity, if we are able to reduce the cost of our production, and that reduction is caused is basically considered to be as an economies of scale. So, economies of scales refers to the efficiencies, okay, associated with the large scale production. So, whenever we are producing at the larger scale, the efficiencies which we are getting, which helps in the reduction of our cost, would be considered as an economies of scale. Further, we are saying that it is a situation in which long run average cost curve, the LAC curve which we have talked just now, right, of producing a good as well as services decreases with the increase in the level of output. And just now I have shown this to you, that whenever we will increase the output, this LAC curve will decrease, and when further we will increase the output, this will convert it into diseconomies of scale. So, right now we are talking up to this part, when with the increase in the output, the cost which decreases, the LAC curve which reduces, where we are getting the advantage of reducing the cost of our production, would be considered as an economies of scale. And this part, when further we are increasing the output, that we will cover under the diseconomies of scale, how we will be getting those disadvantages, right. So, let us talk about the economies of scale, where we have classified it into two categories. We call it as an internal economies and external economies, right. So, here we are going to understand how we are going to get the advantages by working at the large scale. So, here the first is internal economies. Now, these are the economies which a firm is going to get because of their size on which they are working. So, this explained as a cost per unit depends, okay. The reduction in the cost per unit depends upon the size of the firm. If the firm size is large or they are working on the large scale, then what advantages they will be getting because of which their cost is reducing, those would be considered to be as an internal economies of scale. Whereas, external economies are because of the size of industry, not the size of the firm, right. If the size of industry, and industry is basically the group of firms dealing in a same product line, right, like we call it as in banking industry. So, banking industry comprises of all the banking institutions, right, and we call it as an educational industry. So, all the educational institutions comprise this educational industry. So, industry is basically the combination of firms dealing into the same product line. Internal economies, we are saying, are the advantages which a firm is getting because of their own size of operation, whereas external economies are the benefits where they are able to reduce their cost because of the size of the industry, not the firm, right. So, this is something you need to remember. And one most important thing is all inputs are variable in the long run, that we have already understood that there is no concept of fixed cost. Fixed cost is only applicable in the short run, because these are the costs which we cannot change within a period of time, but after that period we will be able to change them. So, they becomes variable. So, only economies of scale can influence the shape of long run average cost curve, right, as because we have variable cost in the long run only, there is no fixed cost in the long run. Therefore, this long run average variable cost curve will get affected by the economies of scale. So, let us start with the internal economies first. How a firm is going to get the economies internally because of their size of operation. So, here further we have categorized it into 6 different heading, and here we will be going to talk about labor economies, technical economies, marketing economies, managerial economies, transportation and storage economies, as well as financial economies. Now, let us talk about the very first one, where we are going to understand how large scale firm is going to get an advantage in the form of labor. So, one thing here you need to understand, the firms who are working at the large scale are having an advantage because they are having more people who are working in their organization, and one thing which they can go with is called as division of labor and division of work, right. So, division of labor is basically the aspect which has been propounded by Adam Smith, who is also known as the father of economists. He is the one who says that it is easier for the larger scale companies to divide their work, and according to the division of work they can make the division of labor. Now, with this division, what advantages firms are going to get? That is the advantage of specialization. If you are assigning a person a repetitive nature of job, right, that person will get specialized in doing that work, and once they are becoming specialized into their area, the time which they are going to take and the efficiency which they are going to produce with that work will be higher, right, and this efficiency will reduce the cost and reduce the time of doing that work. So, in large scale plants, worker can be assigned repetitive nature of jobs, and an entire job can be broke down into the process. Rather than giving different kind of jobs to different people, it is better to divide your work initially, and based on the division, the processes which you have divided and those division of work you have assigned to the specific people. So, such process can be assigned to the worker or the group of workers, and by doing that repetitive nature of job, they become specialized into their area. So, specialization we would need lesser training, right, people will become specialized, so they will be trained enough to do that work, lesser time would be needed, and actually lesser supervision is also required. Otherwise, what will happen if you are giving a new task to a new person, then you need to supervise that person, you need to tell that person how it has to be done. So, unnecessarily we are also involving one person into that particular task, right. But by division of work, you have assigned that repetitive nature of work to that person, and this person is doing it on a regular basis. So, he himself becomes specialized into it, he does not need any kind of a supervision, he will do his work within the time or maybe faster than that, and there would be lesser training required for him to do that task. So, all these things, right, with the reduction in time and the reduction in supervision as well as reduction in training will help the organization to reduce their cost and to get better operations or better results, you can say, right. So, this is how labor economies we can get by working at the larger scale. Then next we have technical economies, how companies are getting the advantages in terms of techniques, right, when they are working at the larger scale of organization. So, here again we have two things. The first one is a specialized equipment. It is easier for the larger organization to have capital intensive techniques and where we have more specialized equipment, and as we all know, better the state of technology, better will be the size of output, and if you are producing in bulk, definitely the cost of production will be lesser. So, this specialized equipment can be used in the larger organization because they have better capacity to install smart technologies in their organization, and this integration and automation of the process will also help in the cost of production. If you are doing that work with a labor intensive unit, then you need more people to do that task, and that kind of quality will also not be maintained. But yes, in case of that, if you are installing some machine which do that work in an integrated and automatic type of way, where you will be able to get better result. So, in large scale production, large machine would be needed because the production has to be done at the larger scale. So, for a given amount of input, these machines may render output in the larger quantity. Okay. So, lesser input is being needed and more output you can generate with these technique. Okay. So, beside this, you can also ensure that more efficient use of available raw material can be done, right, because there will be lesser wastages, tasks are being taken up by the machine, and those things can be done in a most efficient manner, right. So, this is how we can get these technical economies by working on the larger scale. Better specialized equipment can be used. We can always overcome our labor intensive units with the capital intensive units, where lesser input would be required to generate the higher output. Okay. Then next we have marketing economies. In the form of marketing economies, how we are getting the advantage. So, the first point says firms producing at the large scale are requiring the material also in bulk, right. So, large scale firms usually purchase their requirement, the raw material which they require for the production, because their production size is higher. So, definitely the purchase of raw material will be in bulk, and because of purchasing things into bulk, they are getting better discounts, and these discounts will help them to minimize their cost. So, this is something which we also observe. If we are buying something in a smaller quantity, then we need to pay more for that, but for the same thing, if we are buying the larger quantity of these things, then definitely we will be getting good discounts, and that is the difference between the retailer as well as the wholesaler, because wholesaler are the people who purchases in a bulk, right, and because of that whatever the purchase they are making, they are getting it at a lesser price, whereas the retailers are the people who are buying in a smaller quantities, and for that reason they need to pay more for it. So, this is one advantage which a larger scale organization firms will get, because they are producing in the larger quantity. Large scale firms can also minimize their expenditure on advertisement, right. This is again a very good aspect which they are going to get. Firms who are working at the large scale, and as we all know, advertisement is important for generating the sale of your product in the market, to make them aware of your product, it is very important to advertise. So, advertisement cost per unit will get reduced if you are working at the larger scale, because advertisement cost will remain same, but when you work at a larger scale, your per unit cost will be lesser. Okay. Suppose you can say that for producing 1 lakh units and for producing 5 lakh units, whatever the size of production you are making, if you are spending the same amount on the advertisement, the media which you are using for your advertisement or the sources which you are using for your advertisement, the amount which you are paying to them would be same, because it hardly matters to those sources whether you are producing in a smaller scale or you are producing in a larger scale, ultimately you have to pay them the same amount. So, here your cost of production will be cost per unit of advertisement will be lesser, right, if you are producing in a larger quantity. Okay. Another advantage which you are going to get in marketing economies, larger firms can have their exclusive wholesale dealers, because the people who are producing in the larger quantities, they need to keep their product in the warehouses or the storage areas are being required. So, they have their exclusive whole dealers who are purchasing directly from them, because they are producing in the larger quantity, they need not have to find out their own dealers, wholesalers are directly approaching them for the larger quantities which need to be sold in the market. So, again these firms who are working on the larger scale are supposed to spend less on the distribution network also, because directly people are coming to them for their for taking up their output or for taking up the products for them and to distribute it into the market, right. So, the better utilization of sales staff can be done in a larger scale organization. So, again this marketing economies also help us in the cost reduction. Then moving ahead, we also get managerial economies. As we all know, manager is a very important person and plays a very important role in the organization. So, how managerial economies are being taken up in the large scale organization, because in the large scale organization we have different units, we have different departments dealing into different areas, right. For the small firm it is very difficult for them to appoint different managers, but for the large scale we have HR managers, we have finance managers, we have marketing managers, and these people have the specialized knowledge of their area where they would be able to take up the task in a better manner. So, large production can ensure better managerial functions by way of better supervision as well as administration, okay, because these are the people who are able to take up the things in a better manner because of having those managerial skills and administrative skills in them. So, here they will be here the company will be able to get advantage because of their skills. Departmentalization becomes possible because of the larger organization, like I said, because the organization is working on a large scale. So, you can have a department in your organization. Planning and organization becomes worthwhile, right. Otherwise, for the small scale, one person who is the owner of the company, he is playing each and every role, right. He is also recruiting for the company, he is the person who is planning for the training of the employees, he is working for the marketing strategies, he is also arranging the finance for the company. So, here one person is playing the multiple roles, and might be possible he or she is not capable of managing all the roles well together, right. In place of that single person, if a person from the area who has the specialized knowledge of that area would be able to perform better and would be able to generate better results, right. So, large scale firms also have an advantage of advanced techniques, right. For the faster communication in the organization, they can use better communication techniques, they can have better facilities of telephones, faxes, computers, right, and their own means of transportation, which makes their work faster and easier. So, all these quick help decision making and saving valuable time of the management helps in the cost reduction. So, basically what we are talking right now is the advantages, the economies which a firm is getting while working on the large scale. Moving ahead, let us look at the transportation and storage economies, how firms are going to get transportation and storage economies working on the large scale. And we can say that the large firms can utilize their transport facilities because of their production and sale in the larger quantity. So, here we have one example to make it more clear how large firms are getting the advantages in terms of transportation. Suppose there is a firm, there is a truck, right, and truck is having a carrying capacity of 50 drums, okay. Truck company is sending their products to their customer and we are sending it via truck, okay, and the truck has a capacity of carrying 50 drums at a same time. Paint charges freight 5,000. Suppose we are sending this truck from Delhi to Agra and the freight charges which we need to pay is 5,000 and the carrying capacity of the drum is 50 drum of the truck is the 50 drums. So, if a small company whose requirement for a full year is just 20 drums, okay, a smaller company, because their requirement will be smaller because they are purchasing it or they are working at a small scale. So, their output they are generating in a smaller size. So, therefore, the material which they are requiring would also be lesser. So, they just require 20 drums. Again they will have to bear this transportation cost. So, what will be the transportation cost? 5,000 divided to 20, right. So, this goes to 250 per drums, right. 250 per drum will be the transportation cost for the smaller companies, because they are requiring lesser, they have their lesser requirements and the carrying capacity of trunk is more, but they will definitely order as per their requirements. So, for them the cost will be 250 per drum. Now, if you see for a large firm having a consumption of 100 drums a year, right, a person who is working on the large scale, definitely their consumption requirement will be more. So, they have the requirement of 100 drums per year. So, at a time they can easily order 50 drums, right. They can ask the delivery of 50 drums at the same time, because they have more requirements. So, here you can see the transportation cost will reduce, because the freight will remain same. If the distance is same, the freight will remain same and the truck is already having the capacity of 50 drum. So, if you are asking them to send the material with their full capacity of 50 drums, now your cost of production will be reduced, cost of transportation will be reduced to 100 per drum, right. So, for the small scale the transportation cost was 250 per drum, and the same thing for the large company will be 100 per drum, that depends upon the size of their requirement. So, this advantage we have seen at the time of purchasing also. Whenever we are purchasing the raw material, when we purchase in a bulk, we get the better discounts. Same we are benefiting in the case of transportation cost. Our transportation cost per unit will reduce. We are also getting the same advantage in the terms of advertisement. Our advertisement cost per unit will also reduce when we produce at a larger scale. And lastly, we can have some example of the companies like Toyota of Japan. Usually what they do, rather than having their own warehouses, they ask their supplier to have the warehouses nearby their factories, because they are getting good you can say good business from these companies, because they are working on a very large scale. So, the material can be supplied at a last minute or you can say a little minute order, where the company reduces their storage cost also, right. So, company need not have to spend on the storage of these commodities. They can ask directly their supplier to take these supplies on a very little minute order, where they are not spending their time and money for storage of those goods, right. So, this is how the companies are getting the advantages when they are working on the large scale. And last in this, we have financial internal economies. These are all internal economies which a firm is getting because of their scale of operation, right. Large scale companies also get these financial arrangements very easily, and they can have the larger volume of production, right, and for that reason they can easily raise capital from the market. So, large companies are in a better position to raise capital from the market, as well as they are capable more of getting loans, right, because they have good name in the market and their size of business is good. So, people generally trust them and invest their money into their business, where they are capable of generating more income from it, right. So, financial economies are also one of the advantage which the firms are getting internally, right. So, these are some of the areas which we have discussed, where firms are getting economies of scale because of their large scale operation. Now, moving ahead, we have external economies also, right. Initially, we have talked about internal economies, what internal benefits which we are getting working on the large scale. Then now we are going to talk about the external economies, and like I said, external economies are the benefits which a firm is getting not because of their own size, because of the size of the industry, right. If I am operating within some industry and that industry is individually growing, not only my firm is getting good profit in the market, but altogether the demand for industry is good in the market. So, what are the advantages which I am also getting because of the growing demand of that industry. So, as industry grows in size, it would create various economies for the existing firms in the industries, and here we have classified it into 4 categories, where we have technological advancements, easier access to the cheaper raw material, financial institution in proximity, as well as pool of skilled workers. Now, let us look at them one by one. What is meant by technological advancement? See, when the industry grows, the industry spends more money on investments in research as well as development. Okay. So, growing industry will always encourage investments in the research, and by research, by doing such kind of research, you will be able to develop better technology of production, and with this better technology of production, you will get further advantages, okay, which we have already seen. The specialized equipment will help the firms to reduce their cost of production, and as the economy expands, technological innovations will get definitely boost, they will further increases, as we are seeing it in the case of automobile industries. We are getting advanced car these days, we have electric vehicle also. So, all these are possible because of the research and development taking place in the industries, and why we are why the industry is spending so much on these activities, and why they are coming up with the better technologies, because of the demand, right, because of the growing nature of these industries, like IT industry is doing the same. So, these are the technological advancements which firms are also getting because of the growth of the industry. Second is availability of raw material. Definitely the raw material availability will be better because there will be higher demands in the market. So, supplier would have a larger market to cater, and to therefore, the availability of raw material would be easier, right. If you know that this certain industry is growing, and the people who supply the raw material to those industries will also be ready to supply, because they know they have good purchaser. So, they will be available, they are going to get their materials available to their people, right. So, expanded demand of raw material increases the supply also, which encourages the supplier to increase the supply. Then there is a financial institution in proximity. What is this point refers to? Financial institution in proximity means when the industry is growing, they are also having this advantage where they are going to get good finances. Okay. So, as we know, the industry need finance to grow, that is for sure, and financial institutions look for avenue for investment. So, this is a kind of an interrelationship, right. Firms need the investors, financial institutions, and financial tutors or institution needs the industries where they can invest their money. Okay. So, whatever the money we are depositing in the financial institutions, what are they going to do with that money? Definitely they are going to invest this into the industries which are growing industries, so that they can also get better return, right. So, this mutuality of interest encourages their mutual growth as well as coexistence, and we can easily see that the boom take place in Indian financial sector after the globalization, because globalization has given lot of opportunities for the industries for their growth and their development, and because of that we have seen that Indian financial sector has already taken a boom, right. Then next we have pool of skilled workers. This is also the benefit which an firm is getting because of the growth of the industry, as because large industries provides opportunities for employment. Definitely when there will be a growth of industry, we would be needing more people, and we would be able to have better employment opportunities for the people. So, hence just like technology is improving, material and finance is also getting available, this human resource too would acquire needed skills, right. Like we have demand of this IT softwares. Why? Because this IT industry is growing, everybody would like to do would like to make their career in the IT industry because of the growth in the IT industry. So, if the industries are growing, people will also try to have those skills, and pool of people would like to get their education into that area, right. Because of the management skills required in the organization, people are opting for these management courses, right. So, this is how the pool of skilled workers will be generated. Because of the growing demand of the industry, you are also getting the better talent of the people, right. So, these are the economies which firms can avail because of their size of operation, where we have discussed them into two categories: internal economies and external economies. Internal economy arises because of the operations or the size of a firm, whereas external economies arises because of the growing demand of the industry, but not the firm, right. So, I hope these economies are clear to every one of you. So, as we have discussed about the economies of scale, let us start with the diseconomies of scale. Now, diseconomies of scales refer to the disadvantages you can see, and now here we are talking about the second part of our long run average cost curve, which is of U shape, which we have discussed, where the cost has started increases with the increase in the size of output, right. So, how this economies of scale takes place and why the cost increases with the increase in the output will be clear to you. So, if some cost of the business rises with the increase in the size by the greater proportion, right. If you are increasing the size and you are able to increase the cost is increasing more than the output, then definitely you call it as an diseconomy of scale, right. So, this particular condition would be considered to be as an diseconomy of scale. So, it occurs on the right side of the long run average cost curve, just like I have drawn. The left side are the economies of scale, and on the right side, when these cost has started increases, we call it as an diseconomy of scale. This will always be upward sloping, implies that average cost is increasing, right. So, again we have classified this diseconomies of scale into two categories. We have internal diseconomies and external diseconomies, and the implications are same. Internal diseconomies are because of the operations of the firm, because you are increasing the size of your firm or you are working at the large scale operation. Because of that, whatever the cost increase is called as internal diseconomies, whereas external diseconomies, this is because of the industry, right, because of the large size of the industry, not because of the individual size of the firm. So, let us look at the very first part where we are going to discuss internal diseconomies. Now, internal diseconomies, it emerges from the difficulties of managing a larger organization. Since we are talking about the economies and diseconomies of the largest organization, and when initially we increase the size of our output, right, there we get the certain advantages, there we get the certain economies, but definitely when the size increases more than required, right. So, it becomes difficult for the organization to be managed, and because of the larger size, a bigger size of the company, it becomes difficult for the management to manage. So, all these problems will arise. The very first problem says, if the size of operation becomes unwildly, right, the size of operation unwildly, you have increased the size of your operation, which becomes very difficult for the manager to manage it, then these problems will takes place. There will be difficulty in the coordination, right, among the different work groups, and units may become complex, right. We have talked about managerial economies, we have talked about that in large scale organization departmentalization becomes possible, where different managers can manage things in a better way. But what happens when the size increases unwildly, then there will be a problem in the coordination, and this problems will definitely increase the cost of the organization, right. If the HR manager is not coordinating well with the finance manager, or the finance manager is not coordinating well with the production manager, then definitely who is going to suffer? The company's operations are going to suffer, and it will increase the cost, right. So, coordination among the different set of people, different groups of people will be a problem. Then too much specialization may lead to boredom and monotony among workers. If you remember, we have talked about labor economies, and there we have talked about division of work, division of labor, where we have assigned the repetitive nature of work to the person, so as we can get the advantage of specialization, because the specializations require lesser time, lesser supervision, lesser control, right, lesser training is being required, if a person is specialized into his or her area. But here you can see when too much specialization is being done, that it leads to boredom. People feel bored, they feel monotony of the work, and when monotony will be there, definitely their enthusiasm or the motivation of doing that work will be reduced and their efficiency will go down. Then management may become less effective and thus directly imposes the cost. The managers which we were talking earlier were giving the advantage to the companies. Now maybe because of the workload, maybe because of the larger size of operation, they becomes inefficient, and when they are not working efficiently, then definitely the cost of the organization will be increased, right. People working in the larger organization may also feel less committed because of the lesser communication between the people, less coordination among the people, right. They do not able to develop the sense of intimacy with the organization, where they are not feeling that connect, right. And if you are not feeling that connect, it will be difficult for you to work with that intention, right. It is very important for the organization to develop that connect with your people, where they are doing your work with the dedication, with the motivation, so that whatever the work they are doing, they would be able to produce better results, right. So internal diseconomies are basically seen as the disadvantages which arises because of unevenly distribution of your size of operations. If they spread unwindly, all the benefits which we have seen, which we have talked in terms of technical, in terms of transportation and storage, or maybe in terms of advertisement, we have talked about financial economies, all these things are slowly and steadily converting into diseconomies, and they are increasing the cost of the organization, and that is why a long run average cost curve slope will go upward, right. So it is not advisable for the organizations to cross that limit where they are unnecessarily unwindly spreading the size of their business, which is ultimately not going to give them any benefit, but also increasing their cost. Now let us look to the next part of it, where we have external diseconomies. Now what is meant by external diseconomies? Like I said, external diseconomies are the economies which arises because of the size of the industry, that is not individual to the firm. So here what we are saying, as a business becomes largely, right, when the demand of industry increases, that means the demand for all the firms working in that industry will increase. So if there will be a more demand of the things, then there will be a pressure on the supply of raw material, because all the firms in that industry would be requiring raw material, would be requiring labor, thus raises their input price, right. If every firm is demanding the raw material from the supplier because of their demand in the market, then definitely supplier will sell those inputs at the higher price, and if the inputs are being purchased at the higher price, then definitely the cost of production will be higher. Like we have talked about, the pool of skilled workers has been created because of the size of industry, right. Now these skilled workers will charge higher prices to show their skills or to work with the organization because of their higher demand in the market. So this is again a simple economics we can put here. It is all the game of demand and supply. When there will be a more demand and the lesser supply will be there, definitely the price of those things will go up. So same thing happens in these external diseconomies. When the size of organizations spread unwidely, in that case when the demand increases for the input, for the raw material, for the labor, then their demand increases. The increased demand will reduce the supply, and the reduction in supply causes more price of these things, right. Whatever the inputs you are going to get, you will be getting it on the higher prices, and that will increase the cost of production. So for example, you can also see recent pressure has put the demand for cement, steel and fuel prices to be raised in the industries, because these are the industries where the demand is growing, and because of the growing demand of these products, their prices increases, and with the increase in the prices, the cost of production has increased, and with the cost of production and increases the prices further. So all things are interrelated and have a connected effect, how the things are going to get affected, right. So this is, now we have seen why this average cost curve, the long run average cost curve is of U shape, and how these economies and diseconomies arises. Initially these advantages, these economies helped us to reduce the average cost, long run average cost, and further when we increase the size of operation where the input which we are putting are more than the output which we are getting, right. So, that causes as an diseconomies of scale. So, if we summarize the overall topic of economies and diseconomies of scale, we can say that here we have talked about economies into two parts, internal economies and the external economies. Internal economies arises because of the size of the operation of the firm itself, whereas external economies arises because of the size of industry, not the firm, because of the overall demand of the industries, how the individual firms are also being benefited. So, those are being considered to be as an external economies, whereas in diseconomies, as these are the diseconomy arises when your cost increases with the increase in the output, okay, and the increase in the cost would be called as diseconomies of scale. Again we have internal diseconomies and external diseconomies. Internal diseconomies because of the internal mismanagement or the poor management of the company within the organization, right, whereas external diseconomies arises because of the growing demand of that industries, right, which increases the demand of the input, which put pressure on the increase in the demand of the inputs, of the raw material, of the labor, right, and because of which their prices increases, and these increased prices will increase the cost of production, right. So, this is about your economies of scale. Now, let us look at the next heading where we have economies of scope. Now, how we are going to differentiate this economies of scope with economies of scale? Economies of scales refers to the size of operation on which you are working, right. Like we have talked about the economies of scale of large scale, right. If a company is operating on a large scale, how they are going to get benefit. But here if we talk about economies of scale, scope, this basically arises with the lower average cost of manufacturing a product when two complementary products are produced by a single firm. When two products are being produced by a single firm using the same kind of input resources, then the kind of advantage they are going to get, the help which they are going to get in the reduction of their cost would be known as economies of scope. So, it is applicable basically to the firms which are producing more than the one product, right. This concept is not applicable for those who are producing only the single product, but for the firm who are producing more than one product, they can obtain they can obtain their production and the cost advantage, which is known as economies of scope, where they are producing two products or more than two commodities may be of similar nature, right, which have a joint demand, which can be demanded jointly, right. So, there the people are able to get economies of scope. Economies of scope, how they are helping? They are actually helping in the marketing strategies like product bundling, right. You are selling two products together, right. What has been done? If a company is producing like a toothpaste and a toothbrush, because these are the things which are demanded jointly. So, they are producing them together and they are bundling them together and selling to the customer all togetherly, and you are selling your two products at the same time, right. So, this is a kind of a marketing which you can do very easily. A company who is producing a shampoo and also producing a conditioner. So, they are bundling their product together and consumer is asking for the shampoo and you are able to sell your two commodities at the same time. This is also helping in family branding or umbrella branding, right. Within a name of one company, you are able to brand out your all products togetherly, because you are producing more than one product and you need not have to advertise them separately like Hindustan Unilever Limited or any conglomerate company like Tata's, like Reliance. So, all these people are getting the advantage of economies of scale because they have use their business into different operations where they are using different commodities, where they are operating with the different products and they are taking the advantage of family branding and umbrella branding to brand their products in the market, right. There are two kind of diversification which a company can do. One is concentric and the other one is conglomerate. Concentric diversification is a diversification which you are making into a same or related product line, right. Amul is an example of concentric diversification. The products which they are providing are of dairy products, right. All their products are of are related to the dairy, right. Whereas Reliance and Tatas are the example of conglomerate where they have diversified their business into different areas, they are working into different product lines. So, that is being referred to as conglomerate diversification. So, I hope economies of scope is clear to everyone, where we are saying that economies of scope arises where you are producing more than one commodity and you try to produce usually the complementary goods which are jointly demanded, so that you can use the same kind of input resources and the material to produce the similar kind of a commodity which you can also sell together. So, here if we can see how we are differentiating between economies of scale and economy of scope, you can say that economies of scale refers to the change in output of a single product type, right. When you increase the output of a single product, so what impact it is going to create on your average cost, that is called as economies of scale. If the cost is reducing, then we are getting economies. If the average cost is increasing, then we call it as in diseconomies. Whereas economies of scale, economies of scope refers to the change in the number of product of different type, right. Different products you are producing, and when you are making the change in the number of those products, then we call it as an economies of scope, right. So, difference is this between economies of scale and economies of scope. So, now let us look at the scope index. We are talking about economies of scope. So, it is important for us to know about what is meant by this scope index. Scope index is basically helping the firm to know whether they should produce these products togetherly, right, or they should be produced separately. Okay. So, what is the scope index of producing these goods together, because ultimately we are talking about the economies, how we are able to reduce the cost. Economies refers to the reduction in the cost, either you are getting it by the scale or you are trying to have it by a scope, right. So, this scope index is helping you to measure whether you should go with the production of these commodities in a single unit with the same manufacturing unit, or you need to have a different setup for it. So, economies of scale can be measured by the ratio of average cost to the marginal cost when a firm produce joint or multiple product. Okay. When a firm is producing joint or multiple product, then this is being used, and here we use the concept of average cost and marginal cost. And we all know average cost and the marginal cost, these are the two important costs which help us to attain the optimal level where we can find out like up to what point we should produce, so that our cost of production should be reduced. So, here the scope of index says that if we are producing different commodities like commodity 1, commodity 2 and commodity 3, these are the 3 separate commodities or maybe the complementary commodities which we are producing together, minus total commodities we are trying to produce, and then we take the average of commodity 1 plus commodity 2 and commodity 3. So, how we are going to understand the scope of this S in scope index? If the scope S value comes positive, right, if the value comes positive, that means we should go we should go with the production of all the 3 products or all the different products which we are trying to produce with the same product line, right, with the same manufacturing unit. Or if we are getting the results in negative, then definitely we should try to produce them separately, right. So, this kind of a decision making can be done with this scope index, and how this will help you in planning out your production activities, because ultimately the focus here is in the reduction of cost, how the cost of production can be minimized, and this long run average cost curve is helping us to make out various decisions. Like in our yesterday session also we have discussed, we not always work up to the optimum quantity, right, though we are able to find out the optimum point with the integration of marginal cost and average cost, but we are not always producing up to the optimum point, because we have to make our production as per the demand in the market, right. If the demand is more, then we need to produce more than the optimum point. If the demand is lesser, then we of course have to need lesser than the optimum point, because that quantity will be wasted, right. So, this long run average cost curve again helps you to make out the decision whether you should go ahead with the existing plant size or you should install the new plant size to your business, or to utilize it, overutilize it, or to underutilize it, where your cost will be minimum. So, all these economies of scope can be finded out. This is being done basically when you are producing more than one unit, and economies of scales work when you are increasing the size of any one commodity, right. Now, let us move to the next heading, where we are going to talk about cost and learning curve, right. What is meant by the cost and learning curve? Learning by doing refers to the process by which producers learn from experience. This is very simple to learn, right, and very simple to understand. Learning curve, learning, basically whatever you are doing, your learning takes place, and when your learning takes place, you become specialized and you become experienced into that area, and you will be able to do that work in a better way in future, right. So, production techniques available to the real world firm are constantly changing because of learning by doing and technological changes, right. Whenever we do something, right, when we are doing something, we gain sort of learning to it, how we can make it better, how we can improve it, and this is how the technology grows. This is how people develop new ways of doing things, right. When you start something initially, you are not aware of how to proceed with, what are the things which are being required, how you can do it in a better way, but you once do it, you get the learning, you get you get the experience of doing that things, and you explore new aspects to be associated with that particular process, where you can enhance it, where you can make it more better, right. So, because of learning by doing and technological changes, you will be able to employ these aspects, right. So, technological change is an increase in the range of production technique, right. You come up with the better production techniques that provides new vistas to the producing goods. So, learning gives the experience to the person, and this experience will help the person to develop new ways, new technologies, new methods of doing that particular thing, and which helps it, of course, this helps in the reduction of time as well as cost, right. Suppose if there is a book given to you to read it out, right. So, initially you might take more time to read that book because you are reading it for the first time, right. But if that same book is being given to you to read it again, then definitely the time which you will going to get for the second time will be lesser, right, because now you have already gained that learning, what is there in this book and what has been written where, right. So, you will be able to read it faster, and you may be able to read it much faster when it is being asked to you to read it for the third time, right. So, everything which you are keeps on doing gives you a learning, and those learnings will develop the understanding in your mind, where you can imply those learning in a better way. So, we have seen the integration of learning curve and how this learning curves help in the reduction of the cost. So, let us move further to understand how this learning curves work. The rate of a person's progress in gaining new skills or new experience, right, gaining experience as well as new skills. Whenever the learning takes place, when you keep on doing certain things, your rate of progression increases, your experience into that area will increase, which also helps in the increase in new skills, right. And with that increased set of suppliers, production process, facility which you are using, the workforce you are having, distribution channels and managerial teams, they are all resulting in the improvement of technical efficiency, right. So, learning curve basically makes us understand that once we are managing the things, right, we have a set of suppliers for our company, we have a team which we called as a workforce people, right, we have a distribution channel. So, how we are going to integrate all those things for the better management and for the cost reduction of the company, that can be easily done by doing it, and that is why we always look for the people who have the experience into that area, right. Why people with the experience are demanded more at the higher position, because all these kind of decisions need to be taken up, and better decisions will be taken up by the people who have a experience of it, right, and who will have an experience, who have done it, who learned things, right, and that is why experienced peoples are always being required, right. And one thing which we are talking here about the technical efficiency means which improves the technicalities of your work, which will gives you better result. Efficiency means doing your work in a better way, right, by lesser resources you are requiring and more output you are providing. That is actually meant by efficiency. Now, let us look at this curve, how these curves work. So, learning curves basically represent the extent to which average cost of production falls in response to the increase in output. Whenever you are putting this kind of experience into the business, so you increase the input size, where the cost will be reduced, right. Your average cost of production will be reduced when you will be increasing your output if you apply these learning principle. So, this is how we basically draw this learning curve. On the x axis we have number of attempts at learning, how much time we have taken up to do it, and then on the y axis we are showing the performance. So, you can see initially the learning takes place, but that is taking place at a slower pace. So, slow beginning takes place because you take some time to understand it, learn it, and then there is a steep progression. Okay, you learn things automatically, you get to know how things need to be done and what are the different ways you can incorporate to make it better, and then at the later stage there will be a plateau you will be reaching up, where definitely you come to a point where you have understood the various aspect of those things, and further might be possible you are not able to explore it much, right. So, this is all about for our today's session, where we have talked about economies of large scale, and here we have discussed them into two different categories, internal and external. We have talked about diseconomies of scale, further we have classified them into internal and external, and these both internals takes place because of the size and the operation of the firm, whereas external economies and external diseconomies arises because of the size of the industry, right. Then we have understood the concept of economies of scope, right, how we can produce different products which are of complementary nature, so that we would be able to reduce the cost. And lastly, we have seen the integration of learning curve into the reduction of the cost, how learning of the people will help you to get better methods or better production techniques to reduce the cost of your average cost of your company by increasing the size of output, right. So, if we say about the reference material which are being taken up for this lecture, so there are some books we have written here for today's session. Thank you all of you.